In a heartbeat, her polished Real ID hits the tile floor with a hollow clack, thrown aside like trash by a bank teller who saw only the color of her skin. The fluorescent lights flicker above Danielle Rivers as stunned silence tightens around the coffee-stained carpets and the ticking clock on the wall. In that instant, a single act of contempt becomes a verdict in this fated Springfield branch. Respect isn't automatic, it must be earned, and right now it has been denied. If you've ever faced a moment where someone judged you before you spoke, share your story in the comments, subscribe for the next chapters, and hit the bell to follow how Danielle turns this test into a triumph. Part 1. Silent Lobby Tension. Danielle Rivers paused at the threshold of Haven Bank's North Chestnut branch, her heart steady even as doubts rippled through the sparse lobby. The automatic doors had clicked shut behind her, sealing off the outside world of late spring warmth and eager news crews that would come later. Now she was alone under the glare of fluorescent fixtures and the constant tick-tick of a wall clock that seemed determined to remind everyone of every passing second. Her heels made a soft, deliberate tap-tap on the worn carpet, subdued mocha stains and frayed edges speaking louder than any promotional banner. She'd chosen this branch on purpose, one of 3 under consideration for Rivers Global's new U.S. expansion, a project designed to uplift communities often overlooked. Today's task was simple on paper. Verify a wire transfer, show ID, complete a routine step in a meticulously negotiated $3 billion partnership. But Danielle knew that routine could be fraught with unseen obstacles. She approached the security guard by the corner desk, his nose buried in a smartphone. He glanced up, registering her tailored navy suit and the confident poise that came with decades of leadership. Danielle offered a polite nod. He returned it with cautious respect. She felt the momentary thaw in the bank's silent scrutiny, only to realize more eyes tracked her movement. A middle-aged man clutching a worn leather wallet, 2 elderly women perched on fabric-covered chairs, a lone teller typing at her station. Though none spoke, their gazes formed a web of unspoken questions. What is she doing here? Does she belong? Is she asking for something she can't earn? Danielle's breath remained even. She reached the counter where Caleb Warner, thin pale jaw clenched as though the world had already proven him right, sat glued to his screen. His name tag declared Caleb, and his posture spoke of someone who believed this was beneath him. The tension in his shoulders ticked upward as he looked at her. "Good afternoon," Danielle said, voice smooth and measured. "I'm here to verify an international transfer. My team sent the paperwork ahead, but they said ID must be shown in person." Caleb's fingers paused mid-type. He lifted his head just enough to catch the outline of her face, the smooth confidence in her posture. His eyes flicked down to her name on the case file she slid across the counter, then back to his screen. He didn't smile. He didn't move. The silence stretched. She placed her state-issued Real ID complete with the gold star on the counter. The card bore a holographic seal and her title, Danielle Rivers CEO, etched in crisp letters. Yet Caleb's eyes flicked past the card as if it were nothing more than a novelty. Then, with a deliberate flick of his wrist, he let it drop. The card slid off the edge of the counter and clattered onto the tile floor, landing face down among grout lines darkened by years of unremarkable traffic. A single heartbeat of shock rippled through Danielle's chest, followed by a cool surge of resolve. Around her, the lobby grew deathly quiet. Patrons paused in their rustle of deposit slips. The security guard halted his scroll. The clock's ticking seemed louder. Caleb leaned back, arms folded, as if he'd just proven a point more valuable than any customer service manual could offer. His lips curved in a smirk that smacked of hometown triumph. "You people are always in a rush for something." Danielle bent slowly, her spine straight, fingers closing around the ID's edge. She lifted it deliberately, aligning its pristine surface with her gaze. No one reached to help. No one whispered apology. The teller's contempt hung thick in the stale air, and yet in that moment Danielle felt a clarity she hadn't anticipated. She straightened, placed the card on the counter, and spoke with quiet finality. "Thank you for your time." Her heels clicked louder as she pivoted and walked toward the exit. Each step measured, each movement, a testament to the dignity no one had the right to take. The door hissed shut behind her, sealing off the scene of indignity. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the street in a forgiving glow. Danielle settled into the driver's seat of her rental, Lincoln Continental, the leather warm under her palm. She didn't start the engine right away. Instead, she held the ID like a talisman proof of who she was and who she would not allow herself to become a subject of condescension. In the quiet hum of idling air, she considered how this moment spoke not only of one teller's bias, but of an entire system's readiness or refusal to move forward with someone who didn't fit its predetermined script. In that silent lobby, Danielle Rivers had been challenged, tested, and dismissed. But in the seconds that followed, she reclaimed her narrative. Her next move would ripple far beyond Springfield. It would recalibrate trust, redefine partnerships, and demonstrate that true power lies not in the volume of one's voice, but in the unwavering conviction of one's silent actions. Hoy ChatGPT. Danielle slid her gold star Real ID across the counter with deliberate calm. Its polished surface glinted under the bank's harsh fluorescence, as if daring anyone to question its authenticity. Caleb Warner, the young teller with a pale complexion and haircut to corporate regulation, glanced at the card. For a heartbeat, she caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Then, as though an internal switch had flipped, his expression hardened into disinterest. He picked up her ID with a single finger, spun it between his fingertips without care, and let it slip. The card sailed through the air in a slow arc, landing on the coffee-stained tile with a hollow thud. Danielle's gaze followed its path from his careless hand to the unforgiving floor, its holographic seal now hidden in the grout lines. The lobby's ambient hum receded into a vacuum, an invisible shift that left every eye on her and the teller's casual transgression. "You people are always in a rush for something," Caleb muttered, voice low enough that only Danielle and a half-dozen onlookers could hear. His words trailed off as though the punchline had already been delivered, and he was the only one amused. The final something lingered in the air, warped by contempt. Danielle's pulse slowed, her focus narrowing. She had prepared for complex negotiations in European boardrooms, for technical disputes in logistics hubs, even for power plays in government offices. But she had never rehearsed the impact of 4 simple words uttered over a polished countertop. The statement wasn't about efficiency or impatience, it was a veil for deep-seated bias. None of the patrons waiting in the lobby stepped forward. The security guard seated at the corner desk with his casual oversight lowered his phone only to glance away. The bank manager hovered by the door but seemed frozen by uncertainty. Danielle realized that in that moment she was not just a customer. She was an anomaly in the branch's carefully maintained order. Caleb leaned back in his chair, arms folded, a smirk curving the corner of his mouth. His posture shouted triumph that he had seen through the facade, assumed her place in the social hierarchy, and proven his own unspoken theory correct. He had shown her ID was no different from a novelty item, a prop for someone who didn't belong here. For a moment, Danielle considered the options that had guided leaders through moments of injustice across time, retaliation, confrontation, demands for apology. She felt the heat rise in her chest, her lungs burning with righteous indignation. But she also understood the pitfalls a raised voice might become. A headline. A heated argument might be spun against her as aggressive behavior. A demand for recompense could be refracted into another example of an angry black executive. Instead, she chose another path, one she had walked before, but never on such a sudden fulcrum of consequence. She bent down slowly, each movement controlled, and retrieved her ID by its corner. As she straightened, the weight of expectations and years of subtle slights pressed on her, but she held the card with unwavering fingers, the holographic star shining defiantly. Caleb watched, eyebrows lifting slightly in surprise. The smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. It was the first crack in his smug armor. Danielle placed the card back on the counter, its edge aligned with the chipped laminate. "Thank you for your time," she said, her voice calm and unwavering. No anger flared, no passion spilled. Yet those simple words carried more power than any raised volume could achieve. The subtext was clear: you have shown your character. You have revealed your culture. Now I will respond in the only way that preserves mine. She turned on her heels. The click of her heels on the tile echoed through the lobby as though punctuating a silent verdict. Patrons shifted in their seats, chewing on the tableau they had witnessed. The security guard looked up again, meeting her eyes this time, and offered a subtle nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that something unjust had transpired. But no one intervened and Danielle didn't wait for more. Exiting through the automatic doors, she didn't break stride. The hiss of the sensors sounded like a release valve letting the lobby exhale the tension she had laid bare. Outside, the afternoon sun felt less harsh than the glare she had just endured. She paused by her rental. Lincoln Continental, her mind already mapping the next moves. Calls to her COO adjustments to partnership plans. The quiet reallocation of capital away from a bank that had exposed its bias so casually. Caleb Warner remained behind half-heartedly scanning the next customer's deposit slip as though the entire world had not just tilted on its axis. He checked his watch as if the incident was a mere delay in the day's workflow. But for Danielle Rivers, the teller's dismissal marked the moment when one simple act of contempt triggered a seismic shift. It wasn't just her identity he had discarded, it was the implicit promise of mutual respect that partnership depended on. As she settled into the driver's seat, Danielle placed her ID in the sun visor's mirror with a quiet click. She started the engine, the Lincoln's rumble, a comforting presence against the stillness of the moment. The glass of the bank's facade receded in her rearview mirror, distorted by the lens as though punishing clarity with smug illusion. But she didn't linger on the site. Danielle knew this bank was one of 3 being evaluated for Rivers Global's expansion initiative, a program designed to channel billions into communities often bypassed by big finance. It had been a test, a measure of readiness for partnership, and it had failed spectacularly. But she refused to let one teller's prejudice define her vision or dictate her next steps. She pulled on to North Chestnut Street, the Lincoln's tires whispering over asphalt. As she navigated through afternoon traffic, passing a cluster of teenagers laughing outside a Family Dollar, she reflected on her own journey from a Waffle House waitress in Monroe, Louisiana, to a private jet passenger landing in Springfield. Each role had taught her about expectations and assumptions about the ways people tried to define her before she could define herself. Caleb Warner's contempt had been predictable, yet unforgivable. And in that predictability lay its own power to illuminate a system's flaws, to galvanize her team, to reshape partnerships on terms of dignity. She would later address her board with a single line that carried the weight of every slight she'd endured. Dignity is worth more than any zero on a spreadsheet. But for now, Danielle focused on the road ahead. At 2:12 p.m., she would send the text that would reroute $3 billion in capital. Pull the plug. I'll explain tonight. It was the beginning of a silent reckoning, a demonstration that her silence and her refusal to negotiate respect would reverberate far louder than any complaint ever could. And as the faded Springfield bank receded behind her, Danielle Rivers pressed the accelerator. In the quiet surge of the Lincoln Continental's engine, she felt the potent clarity that only comes when one refuses to be defined by another's contempt and instead chooses the quiet power of swift, decisive action. Danielle's fingers closed around the corner of her Gold Star Real ID with quiet precision. The card, once flicked disdainfully onto the tile floor, now felt like a talisman in her hand. Proof not only of her identity, but of the principle at stake. She straightened slowly, rising to her full height as Caleb Warner's smirk faltered into a vacant blink. Around her, the bank's lobby seemed to catch its breath, a collective pause in the hum of routine transactions. She placed the card back on the counter, aligning it perfectly with the cash drawer's edge, as though setting a domino into position. The gesture was deliberate, unhurried, and unspoken message that she was not rattled, not defeated. Then she leaned forward, her posture impeccable, and spoke in a tone so calm it rippled through the frozen air like a fan's gentle breeze. "Thank you for your time." Those 4 words carried more weight than any raised voice could muster. They encapsulated years of determination, hundreds of boardroom victories, and countless battles fought with respect rather than rancor. Danielle gave Caleb a brief nod, no glance of pity, no hardened glare of accusation, and pivoted on one heel. Her navy suit jacket fanned behind her, the perfect complement to her composed departure. Her heels clicked on the tile in a steady rhythm, each step a metronome marking her resolve. The lobby's silence followed her like an echo, stretching the moment into an unbroken corridor of tension and revelation. Customers who had been waiting in line froze, mid-motion deposit slips dangling from their fingertips. The security guard's gaze snapped from his phone to her retreating form, and he swallowed as though realizing belatedly that courtesy should never be optional. Danielle reached the automatic doors without breaking stride. The sensors whirred and the panels slid open, releasing her into the late afternoon light that warmed the street beyond. She did not hesitate. She walked forward, leaving the doors to hiss shut behind her, sealing off the scene of indignity. The click of her heels faded with each step absorbed by the asphalt outside. Once outside, she paused at the curb, the Lincoln Continental humming in idling readiness. The contrast between the fluorescent glare of the lobby and the golden afternoon sun was as stark as the difference between Caleb's bias and her dignity. She let her breath out slowly, a single exhale that carried away the lingering sting of contempt. Around her, traffic flowed, pedestrians hurried by a world moving unawares of the quiet power she had just demonstrated. Danielle opened the driver's door and slid into the plush leather seat, the warmth seeping through the upholstery. She reached for the ID again, placing it into the sun visor's mirror clip, its star gleaming defiantly in the reflected sky. Then she closed the visor, the ID nestled against the glass, symbolically elevated above the floor where Caleb had discarded it. With the engine's purr beneath her, she gripped the steering wheel, rich leather warm under her palms. A gentle hiss from the air vents reminded her of that earlier moment, how easily someone had mistaken her confidence for entitlement, her professionalism for performance. But she had reclaimed her narrative through a composed departure. No protest, no demands, just the swift reclamation of control. She shifted into drive, pulling away from the branch. As she merged onto North Chestnut Street, she ran through the next steps in her mind, the text to Nina Vaughn, her COO, instructing, "Pull the plug." Details tonight. The board meeting in Dallas, where she would recount this moment as the catalyst for realignment, the silent reallocation of capital to institutions that recognize dignity as a baseline, not a bonus. Through the windshield, she caught the sight of a barbershop across the street, its neon sign blinking open. A pair of men in orange safety vests paused in their work, glancing after her with curiosity. She imagined the same dismissive shake of the head Caleb had offered, then pictured her composed exit, unfolding in front of them the image of a woman who refused to condone disrespect. She turned onto the boulevard that led downtown, the skyscrapers of Springfield rising behind her like silent sentinels. Each step of her journey, every decision to lead with dignity rather than anger, had brought her here to a juncture where a single moment of bias would no longer dictate her path. In that realization lay an even deeper truth. The power to reshape systems came not from confrontation alone, but from the clarity to walk away when respect was denied. Her phone lay in the passenger seat, screen dark. She resisted the urge to check for messages not yet. The city's hum was a gentler soundtrack, the distant wail of a siren, the hum of traffic lights shifting, the faint scrape of a trolley wheel. Each sound felt like a drumbeat in a symphony of resolve. Danielle guided the Continental smoothly into the drive of the Bishop House, the boutique hotel she had chosen for its discreet welcome. The wrought iron lanterns cast soft pools of light across the entrance, and a doorman in a simple blazer offered a nod of genuine greeting. No flicker of condescension crossed his face. No assumption marred his welcome. It was the first true reception she had experienced since walking in under that bank's fluorescent glare. She parked, cut the engine, and sat for a moment longer in the quiet glow of the hotel's exterior. The breeze carried the scent of new blooms from a planter by the entrance, an honest fragrance rather than the artificial bouquets she had passed inside. Danielle unfastened her seatbelt and adjusted her jacket, smoothing the lapels with a crisp press of her palms. In the lobby, the bellhop named Jaden remembered her name from her previous stay. He fetched her suitcase without prompting and led her to the elevator. They rode in silence, the plush walls absorbing her thoughts as she prepared for the board call that would soon fill her screen with faces wondering why a partnership had just crumbled. On the 22nd floor, Jaden pressed the button for Suite 221. The doors opened to a room awash in soft lamplight, a desk positioned by the window, a seating area with a leather armchair and a bed dressed in crisp white linens. Danielle set down her bag, then walked to the window. Below, the city's lights had begun to flicker on as dusk descended, each street lamp a beacon of possibility. She stepped back to the desk and retrieved her phone, flipping it open. The first message was from Nina Frankfurt, confirmed wiring imminent. Danielle typed a brief reply. "Pull the plug." I'll explain tonight. Then she hit send, feeling the familiar surge of purpose that accompanied decisive action. Behind her, the sweet, soft carpet absorbed her footsteps as she moved to the chair, sitting down with the poise of someone accustomed to steering the course of billions. She placed her ID back into her purse, thumb, lingering on the star hologram as a reminder that respect could never be consigned to the floor. In the quiet of the Bishop House suite, Danielle allowed herself a moment to exhale fully. She had reclaimed control through composure, proving that dignity's resonance could shatter bias more effectively than any outcry. Now, as the afternoon faded into evening, she would channel that resonance into a ripple of change, one silent, strategic step at a time. Danielle leaned back in the driver's seat of her Lincoln Continental, the cabin quiet, except for the faint hum of the idling engine and the distant murmur of traffic on North Chestnut Street. The afternoon sun slanted through the windshield, casting sharp lines across the dashboard and flickering against the gold star on her real ID, now tucked safely in her purse. She pressed her fingertips to her temples, feeling the underswell of indignation from Caleb Warner's muttered slur still pulsing behind her eyes. Every fiber of her being had absorbed that insult, and now she sat in that curated silence, the calculated pause before action, allowing the gravity of it to settle. The Continental's leather seats held the warmth of the sun, but Danielle didn't touch the climate controls. She didn't need the cold air, she needed clarity. Her mind raced, tracking the implications of a simple bank visit gone wrong. A routine verification transformed into a flashpoint of bias, a moment that revealed a bank's readiness or unwillingness to partner with someone they hadn't expected. The daytime sky beyond the windshield blurred as her thoughts turned inward. She remembered the months of negotiations with Frankfurt, late-night sessions in Basel, hastily scheduled calls in Berlin's early hours, the painstaking threading together of regulatory frameworks and equity guarantees. She had chosen Haven Bank's Springfield branch as an anchor point precisely because she believed in her expansion plan's promise to bring high-impact capital to communities often overlooked by mainstream finance. This branch had been one of 3 finalists evaluated for its reach into working-class towns. Now, in a single dismissive gesture, that promise lay in jeopardy. Danielle ran a hand through her hair, then rested it on the steering wheel's smooth leather under her palm. She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling her father's words. Daughter power isn't measured by how many doors you can open. It's measured by which doors you choose to close. His voice, warm and steady from childhood afternoons in their Baton Rouge kitchen, grounded her. He had taught her that integrity was not negotiable, even if it meant stepping away from opportunities others would kill for. Outside, the city's rhythm played on sirens in the distance, the soft whoosh of a bus rounding the corner, the muted clang of a distant construction site. Inside, time seemed to stretch. Danielle checked her watch, 2:10 p.m. 2 minutes until a decision that would cascade through boardrooms and newsrooms alike. She thought of the board call scheduled for 6 p.m., CST, where faces would fill her screen, voices seeking explanation for why a partnership of billions had suddenly crumbled. Her gaze flicked to the passenger seat where her phone lay face down. She reached over and tapped the screen to wake it. A stream of notifications greeted her: missed calls from Frankfurt's legal counsel, texts from investors seeking confirmation, pings from her investment team, itching for clarity. She scrolled through her messages until she found the one from Nina Vaughn, her COO, all green on our end wire, clears by 3 p.m. The certainty in Nina's words collided with the bank teller's contempt like tectonic plates, and in their collision, Danielle found resolve. She opened a new text to Nina. Pull the plug. I'll explain tonight. A single sentence that carried the weight of 3 years of work, hundreds of meetings, and countless promises of shared progress. She read it over once, feeling each word land with crisp authority, then hit send at precisely 2:12 p.m. The phone pinged with delivery confirmation, and she allowed herself a small, controlled exhale. Silence filled the cabin again, but this was no longer the stunned hush from the lobby or the breathless pause before confrontation. This was the silence of strategy, the pregnant quiet that follows a decisive stroke. Danielle sat back, uncrossing her arms and letting tension drain from her shoulders. She was no longer in that lobby, no longer subject to a teller's prejudice, no longer a cog in a deal defined by others' biases. She was the CEO, and she had chosen to walk away on her own terms. The Continental sighed as she released the brake and eased onto the street. Each block she traversed carried her farther from the scene of disrespect and closer to the realm of rebuilding, of redirection. She passed the barbershop where the neon sign still blinked, caught sight of the Family Dollar's teenagers laughing in the doorway, and felt a momentary pang. This was the world her expansion plan aimed to uplift, a world where people deserved respect, regardless of their account balance. Yet she also knew that respect could not be demanded through grand gestures alone. It had to be woven into every interaction, every culture, every corner of the institution she chose to partner with. She shifted lanes, merging onto the boulevard that led back toward downtown Springfield and the quiet sanctuary of the Bishop House. There she would gather her team, brief them on the shift in strategy, and begin the reallocation of capital to banks that understood dignity as a default, not a privilege. As she drove, her phone buzzed again, an urgent ring from Frankfurt. Danielle glanced at the caller ID and let it continue. There would be time later to address stunned pleas and urgent queries. For now, she focused on the road ahead, on the clarity that had led her to this moment, on the silent decision that spoke louder than any apology could. By the time she pulled into the Bishop House's circular drive, the sun had dipped lower, coloring the sky in soft amber hues. She shut off the engine, the Continental's rumble fading into the evening hush. Sitting for a heartbeat, she placed both hands on the wheel and offered a brief, grateful nod to the road that had carried her through indignity to agency. With purposeful calm, she opened the door, stepped out onto the driveway, and walked toward the lobby. Her heels clicking in measured cadence, each step a testament to the power of quiet decisions. And in that measured stride, she reclaimed the narrative respect not as an afterthought or a concession, but as the linchpin of every partnership she built going forward. Danielle stared at the muted video window as it populated with familiar faces framed in home offices, sleek corner suites, and the occasional city skyline. 30 board members of Rivers Global Strategies, each a stakeholder in the company's vision, waited in expectant silence. The clock on her desk read 6:02 p.m. CST, exactly 4 hours after she had sent the directive to pull the plug. Now she squared her shoulders and took a steadying breath. She tapped unmute. "Good evening, everyone," she said, voice warm but firm. "I've called this emergency meeting to inform you that we have terminated the partnership with Frankfurt Industries." The words rang out across the grid of faces like a bell tolling in still air. Danielle paused, letting the magnitude settle, a $3 billion deal, 3 years in the making, now dead. A rustle of papers fluttered on several screens. Clifford Ames, the board chair. A man whose East Coast pedigree filled his profile photo with trophy case pride and yacht club ties, cleared his throat. His voice crackled through the speakers with the weight of old money. "Danielle." "May I speak?" "Of course, Clifford." Danielle inclined her head. Clifford leaned forward, fingers steepled. "You realize what you're proposing, don't you? Billions on the table, capital for our expansion, the anchor for our U.S. reinvestment initiative. We cannot simply walk away from that without answering the question." Why, Danielle's gaze drifted briefly to the wall behind her, where framed photographs of her father's mechanic shop and her first federal contract shared space. She returned her focus to the camera. "Clifford," she said gently, "I understand the financial implications, but this decision isn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about principle." Another board member, Miriam Patel, Chief Investment Officer and Strategist Extraordinaire, interjected. "Principle?" she asked, tone laced with frustration. "We trade on credibility. Our investors, our partners, they need to see us as reliable. Are you saying we hand that away for principle?" Danielle nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, "because if credibility means tolerating disrespect, then we're building our reputation on an unstable foundation." She leaned forward, voice carrying the quiet authority honed through years of negotiation. "Yesterday, I visited Haven Bank's Springfield branch. I was there to verify a routine wire. Instead, the teller dropped my ID on the floor with a muttered slur. You people are always in a rush for something." A collective intake of breath echoed through the digital gallery. Faces registered dawning comprehension. This was no minor customer service hiccup. It was evidence of a culture misaligned with the values Rivers Global espoused. Howard Lynn, the COO, raised a hand. I heard the details, he said. But was one rogue employee really representative of their entire organization? Could we not remedy it with a formal complaint, a demand for training, perhaps even direct oversight for that branch? Danielle offered a measured smile. I considered that she replied, but this wasn't an isolated glitch. It was a clear sign that when no one was watching or expecting someone like me, their assumptions prevailed. I chose that branch deliberately to test their readiness for partnership. They failed. And I will not build our future on a precedent that says disrespect is acceptable. The room fell into a tense silence. The hum of servers and the distant click of muffled keys were the only sounds. Then Clifford's voice broke through, subdued but incredulous. "You're choosing dignity over dollars," he said. "Dignity is worth more than any zero." Danielle paused, meeting his eyes through the digital divide. "Yes," she said. "Dignity is worth infinitely more than any zero," she repeated. "Because when respect is non-negotiable, partnerships are built on mutual trust, not on fear of reprisal or mistaken assumptions. That trust is what sustains growth through storms, regardless of economic forecasts or market cycles." Miriam's lips pressed into a thin line. "So we're abandoning 3 years of work, hundreds of meetings, progress in underserved communities because you were offended," she challenged. Danielle's expression softened. I was not offended. I was tested, and I passed that test by maintaining composure. But the organization I entrusted with my business did not. She paused to ensure her words landed gently. This isn't about personal feelings, it's about standards. If we partner with entities that treat clients as less than equal, then we compromise our own standard and our clients' trust in us. On the screen, several members nodded, their eyes reflective. One by one, they dialed in their responses. Dev Shah, the CFO, spoke next. "From a financial standpoint, I've modeled the scenario. Redirecting our capital to other institutions, smaller community banks in Alabama, Mississippi, Ohio, will slightly extend our deployment timeline, but preserve our return profiles. And more importantly, we align with partners whose culture matches ours." Danielle offered a grateful glance toward Dev. "Thank you, Dev. That aligns with my recommendation we move forward with our community bank initiative instead of Frankfurt." Clifford exhaled heavily. "Then it's settled?" he asked, voice weary. "We vote." Danielle inclined her head, extending virtual authority. "We vote." One by one, board members clicked their vote buttons. Yes to terminate, yes to redirect capital, yes to uphold our principles. The tally flickered on screen, unanimous. Another moment of silence held before Clifford solemnly spoke. "All right, it's done." Danielle nodded, offering a quiet smile. "Thank you, everyone. This is not an easy path, but it's the right one. I'll distribute detailed next steps and revised capital allocation plans immediately." She paused, letting genuine warmth infuse her final words. "I appreciate your trust in this decision and in the values that guide us." As she muted her line, the boardroom windows closed one by one until her screen alone remained. Danielle exhaled, tension draining from her chest. The hush that followed was not the silence of defeat, but of profound alignment. In that digital conclave, her values had prevailed over bottom-line pressure. She rose from her desk, stretching stiff shoulders, then walked to her bookshelf where 5 framed photos documented milestones in her journey. A high school graduation, the Waffle House apron, her first major contract signing the opening of her Dallas office, and now a moment of principled leadership. Each image represented a step forged through resilience and conviction. Danielle turned back to the window and gazed at the Springfield skyline, now glimmering under dusk's soft light. Somewhere in that city, the teller who had dropped her ID would soon learn the far-reaching consequences of his contempt. But for now, she allowed herself a brief, satisfied smile. She had honored her father's lessons, proven that dignity could outweigh the heftiest zero, and charted a course forward that would reshape her company's legacy. Silence, she knew, would remain her most formidable ally, an unspoken testament to the power of purposeful choices even in the face of billions at stake. And as night settled over the city, Danielle Rivers stepped away from her desk, ready to lead Rivers Global into a future built not merely on capital, but on the unwavering bedrock of respect. Morning light filtered through the blinds of the Haven Bank branch on North Chestnut as Gwen Lee burst through the door, coffee cup in hand, her lips pressed into a tight line. The stale aroma of reheated brew mingled with the faint hum of the HVAC system, underscoring the branch's sleepy Monday atmosphere. Already her inbox had exploded with voicemails, red lights blinking like urgent alarms on her phone's screen. She set her cup down with a tremor of regret, fingers brushing against the rim as she hit play on the first message. "Gwen, this is Trevor at Regional," came the clipped voice heavy with concern. "We've got a situation. A high-value client evaluation went sideways yesterday. You might have heard, call me back ASAP." Before she could catch her breath, another message began. "Hey Gwen, it's Mike in PR. We're hearing something about a termin." The message cut off, leaving a trace of garbled static. Gwen's heart thudded against her ribs. She'd read the early morning emails, a terse note from corporate expressing deep regret over an incident, a half apology that felt more like a legal formality than contrition. But now Trevor, Mike, and probably half a dozen other executives were all barreling down on her. Gwen exhaled, straightened her shoulders, and tapped her tablet to send a quick text. "Briefing now. Conference room A." She clutched her mug, its coffee sludge sliding across the bottom, and strode down the hallway, flanked by fluorescent lights that flickered ominously. Inside conference room A, her tellers and customer service reps sat in folding chairs, murmuring amongst themselves. Gwen cleared her throat and locked eyes with each of them, swallowing back the guilt that knotted her stomach. "Good morning," she began, voice steady though her heart raced. "You may have heard about an incident with a client yesterday. I'm here to address it directly. Yes, a customer's ID was handled improperly. No, that behavior is not acceptable." A young teller named Marisol raised her hand. "Is the client okay? Are they coming back?" "I don't know," Gwen admitted. "I'm still getting details. I can tell you our regional office is conducting a full review. Corporate will handle any further outreach. For now, let's focus on our day. We serve every customer with dignity and respect, no exceptions." "Understood." The tellers nodded, though their expressions wavered between sympathy and unease. Gwen offered a quick nod in return and motioned toward the door. "Thank you. Let's make it a strong morning." As the staff dispersed, Gwen lingered by the projector screen, replaying the voice messages in her mind. She tapped the last voicemail, the one from corporate. "We expect remediation plans by close of business. We're delighted your branch was flagged by Ms. Rivers herself." The message trailed off into a strained attempt at positivity that only made Gwen's shoulders sag further. Back at her desk, Gwen scrolled through emails from headquarters. One was from the Diversity and Inclusion team. "Urgent, prepare to launch mandatory bias training for all Springfield staff." Another arrived from Legal Potential Defamation Risk. "Please secure all surveillance footage for review." The weight of these edicts pressed on her a brand crisis unlike any they'd faced before. Yet most disconcerting was the silence from the teller at the center of it all. Caleb Warner, thin, pale, awkward at best, was already punching his time card at 9:14 a.m. as though he'd simply strolled in for an ordinary shift. His hoodie hung under his blazer like a telltale sign of nonchalance. Gwen watched him, clock in his posture, languid eyes avoiding hers. He tapped at a paper punch, then glanced sideways at her desk. Curiosity mingling with unease. Gwen stood and approached him quietly. "Caleb," she said, voice low so only he could hear. "My office, now." He exhaled, his shoulders slumping as if resigning himself to trouble. He followed her down the corridor, the hush of the branch pressing in on them both. Once inside her office, Gwen closed the door. "I need an explanation," she said, hands on her desk. "What happened yesterday? I've had 3 calls about." Caleb's eyes darted around before settling on hers. I didn't mean anything personal, ma'am." "She looked important, sure, but I thought she was just another—" He struggled, throat tightening. "I'm used to certain customers demanding everything. I guess I snapped. I didn't realize who she was until—" He trailed off, guilt shadowing his features. Gwen's chest tightened, but she kept her tone controlled. "Until you found out she was Danielle Rivers, CEO of Rivers Global Strategies, a $3 billion firm." She paused. "Yes, you didn't know. But what you said and did was unprofessional. No worse, it was discriminatory. You dropped her ID on the floor. That single gesture cost this branch its reputation, and it almost cost our company a major partnership. Caleb's face paled. I'm sorry, he whispered. I really am. I don't want to lose my job. Gwen sat down and leaned back, exhaling. I realize you're sorry. Corporate wants to make an example diversity training, possibly reassignment. But let me be clear, I want you to learn from this. We're scheduling training, yes, but I'm not going to fire you yet. She locked eyes with him. However, I need you to understand that respect is not optional here. Do you understand? Caleb swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. Good, Gwen said, softening slightly. I know that look, fear of being singled out. But this isn't about punishment. It's about ensuring this never happens again. You're part of this community, and so is she. We have to treat everyone with equal dignity. Do you think you can do that? He nodded glumly. I will. I promise. Satisfied, Gwen let him go, noticing how the afternoon light had shifted as though reflecting her own mood swing. She returned to her desk and drafted a short apology memo to branch staff, then sent a follow-up note to regional leadership with her plan. Immediate bias training staff meetings, a review of customer service protocols, and personal outreach to Ms. Rivers' team. Each keystroke felt heavy-laden with the consequences of yesterday's contempt. Across town, Rivers, Global's board call closed, with Danielle tucked into her Bishop House suite, already plotting the redirection of funds to community banks aligned with her values. Gwen clenched her pen and stared at the blinking cursor on her screen, the stark reminder that the bank's survival now hinged on repairing not just a partnership, but its entire culture. On the lobby floor, a customer approached the counter, depositing a crisp stack of bills. The new teller, eyes wide with curiosity, asked how the day was going. Gwen interjected smoothly. I want you to know we're committed to making things right for every single customer. She offered a genuine smile, frustration tempered by resolve. Beyond the front doors, Springfield's morning carried on, shops open, children boarded buses. The world spun unapologetically onward. But inside Haven Bank, change had begun. In the wake of Caleb Warner's careless gesture, a brand crisis had sparked corporate soul-searching, mandatory training, and a hard reckoning with bias. And Gwen Lee, thrust into the eye of the storm, vowed that respect would no longer be an afterthought, but the cornerstone of every interaction in her branch, even if it took every person in her team to relearn how to see each customer as an equal. Danielle sat at the long mahogany conference table inside her Dallas office, the late afternoon light slanting through floor-to-ceiling windows. The skyline glowed with reflections of glass and steel symbols of power and prestige. But today her focus lay elsewhere. Before her lay a spreadsheet of Rivers Global's pending investments, each line representing millions funneled into institutions that served communities across America. Yet those figures in Excel had just been rewritten billions once earmarked for Frankfurt, and Haven Bank's regional branches now needed new destinations. She pressed her fingertips together, recalling the teller's contempt in Springfield, the board's hush in her video call, and Gwen Lee's struggle to keep the branch afloat. Respect, she had decided, was not a courtesy reserved for status, it was a baseline for every partnership. And so without fanfare or elaborate announcement, she began the reallocation process. Her first call was to the Regional Bank of Alabama, a modest institution headquartered in Mobile with deep ties to coastal communities battered by hurricanes. The bank's CEO, Marcus Ellison, answered on the third ring, his voice warm but astonished. Danielle, I've seen your name attached to some big deals, but I never expected this kind of call. She smiled at the recollection. Marcus, we're moving forward with our reinvestment initiative. I'd like to allocate a significant portion of our U.S. capital to your bank. No strings attached, only that you continue serving your customers with the integrity you've already shown. He caught his breath. We'd be honored. Thank you. Next, she dialed the Mississippi Heritage Credit Union in Jackson, a small nonprofit cooperative known for microloans to entrepreneurs and flexible terms for low-income families. Its president, Rosa Thompson, answered amidst the hum of a bustling teller floor. Ms. Rivers, she said, voice thick with gratitude, we don't normally handle transactions at this scale. Danielle leaned forward in her chair, imagining Rosa's office bustling with activity behind her words. That's precisely why I'm choosing you, Danielle replied. Your commitment to financial inclusion aligns with our own, Let's prove that big capital can uplift without demanding compromises on respect. Thompson paused, then added softly, "We won't let you down." In the corner of her vision, the Ohio Valley Bank's logo caught the light. She picked up the phone and rang their office in Canton. The CEO, Andrew Lee, greeted her in accented English pride and modesty, intertwining in his tone. He spoke of local manufacturing firms struggling with credit constraints of families reliant on personal loans to cover medical bills. Danielle nodded, though he couldn't see her. She laid out the new investment plan. "I want your bank to expand your small business lending program. No public announcement, just the capital in your hands and trust in your stewardship." His voice was thick with emotion. "This means so much to our region," he whispered. By the time Danielle returned to her desk, the spreadsheet glowed with redirections: $1.2 billion to Alabama, $800 million to Mississippi, $1 billion to Ohio, and the remainder spread across other community institutions that had proven themselves in fairness and transparency. She saved the document, feeling the weight of each line. These were not mere numbers, but lifelines for workers, entrepreneurs, and families who needed respect as much as loans. She did not send a press release. She did not schedule photo ops with ribbon-cutting scissors. Instead, she drafted internal memos, brief direct messages to her executive team, capital reallocated. Partners chosen for integrity. Update your departmental plans accordingly. Strategy call tomorrow to align on rollout. No marketing department email blasts, no social media teasers. The decision was meant to speak for itself. Across the firm, staffers noticed the sudden shift. In Dallas, on the trading desk, murmurs rippled through the open office. "Did you see the memo? She just moved billions overnight." In New York, investors recalibrated their expectations. Social impact funds expressed renewed enthusiasm, noting that this move aligned with their focus on equitable growth. A flurry of emails streamed into Danielle's inbox, some from potential partners seeking alignment, others from clients applauding her leadership. Yet not one word left her lips in public. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Danielle stepped out onto her office balcony. The breeze carried the city's hum below, distant enough to feel comforting rather than intrusive. She closed her eyes, recalling the earlier chapters of her journey, the first time she'd negotiated a deal. The early whispers of doubt when she carried a waitress's apron the day her father's advice took root in her heart. "You don't plant anything in hate, Danny. You build something in love." Her phone buzzed. A text from Nina Vaughn, her COO. Community Banks confirmed. "Branch presidents are excited. Investors are calling. Will you brief us tomorrow?" Danielle smiled as she typed back, "Solid. See you at 9. She slipped the phone into her pocket and leaned on the railing, watching the city lights ignite. This reallocation was more than a corporate maneuver. It was a testament to a leadership philosophy that valued people over profits, respect over returns. Each community bank she chose had already demonstrated its worth by respecting every customer who walked through its doors, trusting small deposits, offering flexibility to those in need, honoring each client's story without prejudice. In the quiet of the balcony, Danielle allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. No confetti, no headlines, just the steady knowledge that the next morning families in Alabama would secure disaster loans faster, Mississippi entrepreneurs would find mentoring alongside capital, and Ohio manufacturers would expand hiring more workers. That ripple of impact, unseen by the world at large, carried more power than any press release. She walked back inside to her desk, where the spreadsheet awaited review. But instead of diving into metrics, she closed her laptop and leaned back. Sometimes the most decisive statements were made not in words, but in the deliberate placement of resources, in the act of quietly choosing partners who honored dignity as much as they did deposits. Danielle understood that true change often unfolded behind the scenes in decisions that defied spectacle and prioritized substance. And as the city's lights danced across her office windows, she felt the warmth of purpose settle in her chest, a conviction that respect, when woven into every transaction, would illuminate paths toward equitable growth and forge partnerships unbreakable by prejudice. No fanfare, no showmanship, just actions that spoke volumes. And as night fell over Dallas Rivers, Global's strategic reallocation stood as a silent beacon, a testament to the belief that when capital meets character, communities thrive. Across continents, the ripples from Danielle Rivers' silent exit began to form undercurrents strong enough to shift boardroom tides. In Frankfurt, the headquarters of the German firm, still reeling from her withdrawal, hushed conversations took place behind polished glass walls. Executives who had toasted her vision in candlelit meeting rooms now pondered how a simple ID check could unravel their year-long partnership. The morning after the termination, their COO paused mid-presentation as his phone buzzed with a terse email: Rivers Global has withdrawn. No comment from CEO. He looked up at the faces arrayed before him, models, charts, projections, all unspooling, and realized that silence could carry more weight than any statement. Meanwhile, in Dallas, Rivers Global's PR and investor relations teams hovered in an emergency huddle. Laptops flickered with news alerts, headlines blared: CEO terminates, 3B deal over teller's slur, Danielle Rivers makes quiet exit sparks, corporate culture debate and respect over returns. The choice that shook high finance. Journalists tagged their feeds to Rivers Global's official handle, demanding interviews. A reporter from the Financial Chronicle fired off an email. Ms. Rivers, can you clarify if your decision reflects a broader shift in your investment criteria? Another from the Silicon Valley Insider tweeted, is your silence a sign of protest or a strategic PR play? Each ping added pressure, yet the company's official account remained dark, offering no retort, no apology, no defense, only the quiet hum of deliberate inaction. Inside the sleek offices of a rival investment firm in New York, analysts gathered around screens, eyes widening at the news ticker. One young associate clicked through the story's timeline, reading the details of the teller's bias and Danielle's composed departure. She didn't even speak up, he remarked to a colleague. She just walked away, and billions followed. The colleague nodded thoughtfully. That's a power move. Zero fanfare. Just strategic silence. Back in Dallas, under the glow of LED overheads, Rivers Global's PR lead, Marissa Chen, rubbed her temples. She had prepared reactive statements, carefully crafted talking points, even a full Q&A document. But her boss, the chief communications officer, had shaken her head. Not yet, he said quietly. Let them ask. Let them watch. Our quiet is more telling than any press release. Marissa exhaled, knowing that restraint would test their discipline, but also that a premature statement might dilute the message. Respect is non-negotiable. As afternoon gave way to dusk, a conference call bridged 3 time zones. Clifford Ames, Rivers Global's board chair, dialed in from his Boston townhouse, his wood-paneled study lined with leather-bound books. Have we seen the leaked footage? He asked, voice grave. The operations director, sitting beneath the glow of his office lamp in London, replied, Yes, Chair. It's everywhere now. Clips of Ms. Rivers' ID dropped the teller's muttered slur the walk out. Even local news channels in Springfield are picking it up. Clifford nodded slowly. And no comment from her, he pressed. The operations director hesitated. Nothing. Just silence. Across the line, a murmur of respect for their CEO's commitment to her principles rippled through the executives. In the heart of Chicago's financial district, a round table of bank CEOs convened over lunch. They'd all heard the story how a $3 billion deal dissolved over a single act of disrespect. One veteran banker, salt and pepper hair, trimmed neatly, raised his glass of sparkling water. It's a lesson, he said, voice low but clear. Be careful how you treat every client, every individual, especially those you assume will never sit at your table. A younger peer wearing a burgundy tie replied thoughtfully, You know, for every big CEO, there are thousands of customers who faced worse. But it took someone with her stature to expose it. They fell silent, contemplating the chasm between policy manuals and human dignity. Meanwhile, Rivers Global's offices stayed hushed. The trading floor, usually alive with the buzz of deals, was calm. Traders watched market tickers, but no one placed speculative bets on Rivers Global's reputation. They knew the story was not just about this one transaction, it was about the values that underpinned every partnership. Behind closed doors, the legal team drafted concise memos to regulators and partners describing the redirection of capital and the reaffirmation of corporate standards, all while intentionally omitting sensational details. They trusted that action would speak louder than any spin. That evening, Danielle Rivers attended a small private dinner with a handful of longtime investors at a discreet rooftop restaurant. No cameras, no entourage. Over shared plates of farm-to-table cuisine, she recounted the Sheffield-Springfield incident. In straightforward terms, her tone steady as she described the teller's contempt and her subsequent decision. Investors leaned in, some nodding with approval. One senior partner from a major pension fund raised his glass. "To your conviction," he said, voice sincere. "This is the kind of leadership we need, principled and courageous." The table echoed the toast, and Danielle allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Word of that dinner later surfaced in financial blogs, stirring fresh commentary. Investors stand by Rivers Global. Read one header. Confidence in CEO's ethics pays dividends. Noted another. But at Rivers Global's headquarters, no public acclaim awaited. Their news feed remained barren, a stark counterpoint to the cacophony elsewhere. Silence had seared the message into every corporate ether and media echo chamber. On Morning Business News the next day, the anchor introduced the segment with surprise. In a stunning twist, Rivers Global Strategies CEO remained silent after scrapping a multi-billion-dollar deal over a bank teller's disparaging remark. Is the era of corporate mea culpas over a panel of pundits offered divergent takes. Some lauded her restraint, others scoffed at the lost revenue. Yet the segment closed with a clip of the telltale silence, the black screen of Rivers Global's Twitter feed, the unopened press inbox, leaving viewers with a question louder than any answer. As the buzz settled into a steady hum, boardrooms from London to Sydney were still whispering about the CEO who had walked away. In every corporate hierarchy, the story seated itself as an anecdote, and a warning. Culture isn't built in policy binders. It's forged in every interaction, every unscripted moment. And when dignity meets disrespect, the only sound louder than outrage can be the deliberate choice of silence. In Dallas, Danielle Rivers returned to her office just before noon. The city's glass towers gleamed outside, but inside her walls, her team greeted her with determined focus rather than clamorous fees. They had spent the morning preparing updates on the community bank investments, crafting new outreach strategies, and ensuring that every partner they'd chosen knew how much they valued respect. News headlines were secondary now to the real work, reinforcing the company's values through tangible impact. Danielle sat behind her desk, letting the quiet settle around her. The screens in her office displayed performance metrics, growth projections, portfolio alignments, community impact scores. They all reflected the realignment she had championed. She closed her eyes for a moment, appreciating the contrast between the world's chatter and her own company's calm. In that space, she found affirmation. The loudest statement on corporate culture and respect was not a press release or a keynote address, but a steadfast commitment to the people and principles that mattered most. And as the sun climbed higher, illuminating the Dallas skyline, Rivers Global remained silent, its quiet, a resonant echo in an industry that was still learning to listen. Danielle found the envelope slipped beneath her door on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the Springfield incident. It was unremarkable, plain white, unmarked, except for her name in neat looped handwriting. She slipped her office key out of its lock and closed the door behind her, the soft click echoing in the quiet hallway. On her glass desk, the afternoon sun reflected off the polished surface, illuminating the envelope's stark simplicity. She sat down and placed the envelope beside her laptop, her reflection ghost-like in the black screen. There were no stamps, no return address, just her name. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the flap. The note inside felt like a fragile artifact, a whisper exchanged in secret. With deliberate care, she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper. "Not all of us are like him," it read, penned in a tidy script. "Some of us saw. We learned. Thank you." No signature, just 4 lines that carried more weight than paragraphs of praise ever could. Danielle stared at the words, her breathing slowing as their meaning sank in. Somewhere in that bank branch, a teller who had not spoken up had quietly witnessed the injustice and wanted her to know she was not alone. The office around her walls, adorned with framed articles celebrating Rivers Global's growth awards for social impact and photos of community partnerships, fell away. In its place, she felt the pulse of human connection, the unseen heartbeats of those small acts of solidarity that often go unnoticed. The note was proof that change did not always erupt in headlines or press conferences. It could start as a quiet ripple in places overlooked in moments lived out of view. She lifted the note and tucked it into the front pocket of her blazer close to her heart. The weight of it settled there, a soft reassurance that her decisions had reached beyond boardrooms and balance sheets. That single act of solidarity was a testament to the real work of leadership igniting courage in others, to stand with dignity even in the shadows. Leaning back in her chair, Danielle closed her eyes and let her mind drift back through the chapters of this saga. The sharp click of her heels in the coffee-stained lobby, the hollow thud of her ID on the tile floor, the measured exhale as she retrieved it, the silent text that rerouted billions, the hush that fell over her board, called the scramble of executives in far-flung offices, and the deliberate reallocation of funds to banks that mirrored her values. Each event had been driven by a fundamental choice to refuse disrespect, to cherish dignity over dollars, and to let strategic silence speak volumes. Yet it was the note in her pocket, unsigned, unannounced, that crystallized her legacy. It reminded her that for every public ripple there were countless private currents shaping the future. She envisioned that anonymous teller going about her day, heart pounding, as she slid the envelope under Danielle's door. She imagined the storyteller's own cheek dampened by a silent tear or a proud smile. That moment of courage would have happened whether anyone noticed or not. Danielle opened her eyes and turned her gaze to the city skyline visible through her office window. The late-day light bathed the skyscrapers in golden haze, a quiet echo of the note's gentle affirmation. She stood and walked to the window, placing her hand on the glass as if to touch the distant buildings. The glass felt cool beneath her palm, a barrier that separated her from the world she sought to transform, but also a surface on which her reflection merged with the city's silhouette. She thought of her father's mechanic shop, where she'd learned the value of hard work, and her early days as a waitress, where she cultivated patience and persistence. She remembered the relentless hours spent coding in a rented garage and the first $1 million contract that had felt like vindication. Each milestone had taught her that true power seldom announced itself with fanfare. It built quietly beneath the surface in the conviction to uphold one's worth. Danielle turned from the window and crossed the office to the bookshelf where she kept a small collection of personal mementos. The grease-spattered wrench her father had given her, a framed newspaper clipping from her college graduation, and the first federal contract she'd signed. Now she added the anonymous note to that shelf, placing it beside the wrench as a symbol of solidarity and unseen courage. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop, letting her fingers hover over the keyboard. A new file blinked on the screen, Legacy and Leadership. She typed a single line, "Change often germinates in overlooked moments." Underneath, she wrote, "Remember to honor the quiet acts of respect and courage that form the foundation of our impact." Satisfied, she saved the document and closed her laptop with a soft click. The office was silent once more, but this silence felt different, full of promise rather than tension. It was the silence of a mission carried forward not with noise, but with unwavering integrity. Danielle stepped back to the desk, straightened her blazer, and picked up her phone. She dialed Nina Vaughn's extension. "Hey, Nina," she said when her COO answered. "I just received something you should see." She explained about the anonymous note, relaying the words that had shifted her own perspective. Nina's voice crackled with emotion on the other end. "Danny, that's incredible. Let's share it with the team tomorrow." Danielle agreed, knowing that this moment of quiet power deserved recognition within their circle, even if not to the outside world. After hanging up, Danielle gathered her things. She stepped out of her office into the corridor where colleagues passed by, immersed in their own tasks. She offered each a small nod, a gesture acknowledging that leadership was not a solitary act, but a collective endeavor fueled by the integrity and courage of individuals at every level. Descending the stairs to the ground floor, Danielle reached the lobby and felt the soft hum of the building settle around her. No security guard offered a second glance. This time her presence was unremarkable, yet charged with quiet confidence. She nodded to the receptionist, who greeted her warmly. No bias, no assumptions, just simple respect. Danielle's smile was genuine, reflecting the deep satisfaction of a legacy not built on grand speeches or staged events, but on the resolute choice to walk away with self-respect and to trust in the power of deliberate, quiet action. As she exited the building, the early evening breeze carried the promise of new beginnings. The city's lights flickered on one by one, each a story, each a moment of human endeavor. Danielle climbed into her waiting car, and before pulling away, looked back at the office building, a silent sentinel in the glow of dusk. She whispered to herself, "This is how change happens, one quiet act at a time." And with that, she drove into the night, knowing that her story, and the stories of those who stood with her, would continue to unfold in boardrooms, bank branches, and community centers alike. Her legacy lay not in the deals that hadn't been made, but in the dignity that had been fiercely upheld and the quiet power that would resound far louder than any accolade.